Hey, welcome to today's instructional webinar from T-Splines Inc. about how to render Wii Nunchuck using V-Ray for Rhino. Today's instructor is Claus Coonan, and I am Matt Cederberg, co-founder of T-Splines Inc. Now, today's webinar is really the first time that we've ever done a webinar like this, and that almost all of our webinars focus on T-Splines, which is the product that we make, which helps you more quickly and easily create free-form organic shapes for CAD. But this is the second in a two-part series with Claus Coonan. In the previous webinar, he showed how to model this Wii Nunchuck using T-Splines for Rhino. And now, with the second part of the webinar, Claus will show how to render the Wii Nunchuck using V-Ray for Rhino. So this is really an instructional webinar, and so we've emailed a link to all of you with so you can download the 3DM file that Claus will be using. If you didn't get that email for whatever reason, you can download that 3DM scene here at this address. It's http://tsplin.es/vray. So you can go ahead and download the file there so that you can actually work along with us. So the hope is that while Claus is rendering, you can do it at the same time, ask him questions, and then be able to render using V-Ray. So just to introduce V-Ray for Rhino, it's a powerful, quick, easy to use, and cost-efficient renderer. And the main reason why V-Ray is a product that we've chosen to resell is that we use V-Ray for all of the renders that we do in-house. So here's just some examples of some of the renders that we've done in-house to show off T-Splines using V-Ray. You can see it's a powerful model, a powerful renderer. You can render just about anything with it. It's also fast. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to actually do the renders. It's easy to use, and you'll be able to see that as Claus goes through the webinar. And it's also pretty cost efficient. It's not an expensive renderer. So again, these are just some of the examples that we've rendered with V-Ray inside T-Splines. Here's just some of the features of V-Ray. I won't talk through them all because there's a lot of them. But yeah, it's a pretty powerful renderer. So just to introduce Claus, again, here's the download link if you haven't been able to download the file yet. During this webinar, Claus will give step-by-step instruction in three areas: basic scene setup and design, a basic approach to lighting, and basic material design. And again, we are going to paste this so that you can work through it yourself. So let's just kick off the webinar actually by launching this poll. And if you could just click in to help us understand how you'll be participating in the webinar. Are you going to just be watching, or are you actually going to be working along with Claus as he does this rendering? And again, this will just help Claus so that we're aware of what everyone's going to do. So if you can just click on that poll to vote, we'll leave it open for just a few more seconds. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the poll. And all right, so it looks like about just over 60% of you will be watching, but well over a third will be working along with the instructor. So that's great. I'm glad you're taking this opportunity to learn as you watch and do. So, okay, let's go ahead. So to introduce Claus Coonan, he's a German designer with a background in multimedia, product, and jewelry design. He is interested in process research and experimenting with new technology. In his workflow, he often evaluates how tools from one discipline can be applied to a different field to provide creative solutions for common design process problems. His working techniques have been presented at exhibitions such as SOFA, SNAG, and SIGGRAPH. And he works as a freelancer and consultant and has also taught 3D fabrication technologies at the university level. And one final thing I'll just note at the end of this webinar, we will have a special offer for V-Ray for everyone that sticks around to the end. And I guess the final note before we turn the time over to Claas is just to say that we're really glad to have to support Claas today, Fernando Rentas from ASD Viz and Juan Santocono from T-Splines, who are some of the best V-Ray renderers that I know. So during the webinar, all the attendees are muted, but we really encourage you to ask questions by typing them into the question box, and Juan and Fernando will type back answers, and where appropriate, we will audibly step in and ask Claas to ask those questions to Claas verbally. So please take advantage of that resource. So Claas, let's turn the time over to you.
Okay. Everybody can see my screen?
Yeah, you look great, Claas.
Okay, great. Well, hello everybody for this webinar about first steps with V-Ray. And before I actually go more into how to use V-Ray, most people are maybe intimidated about digital rendering because it's a completely digital process. Whenever I teach digital rendering, I actually started to go with my students into the photo studio. And just as a tip for additional information, V-Ray is a great render program, but there's no nice render button. You have to tell the program what it should do. But if you're new to it, it might be overwhelming. However, if you go online or buy a photography book, or for example, like here, just simply Google car studio setup, you find a lot of great information about where, for example, they place lights, how bright the scene is, how the studio is designed, where do they place, for example, the camera, because that actually already can give you instantly very good visual indicators for how something should look like, so you have a reference then with which you could go into V-Ray and start rebuilding it, or use those as a guide. What you see here right now is the Wii Nunchuck we actually built for the last webinar. And there are three key elements for successful renderings. One is your product, of course, the environment, and then also the material and lights. Let's start, for example, maybe with the scene design. I mean, very simple approaches are, for example, like here you can have a very simple flat plane, or for example, you could have a backdrop. Because this is all digital, you can really build your custom photo studio. And greatly because you don't have physics, you can also place objects wherever you want and render it out that way. I will, for this demo, actually mainly work with the backdrop. And it's just a very simple curve I drew and then extrude into the depth. It is also seen from the side slightly positioned below my object, because sometimes I place lights below there as well. And for lights inside the demo file, you will see few layers with different light setups. Now, lighting is a very, very important part for digital rendering, and before a person goes into material setups, I would always recommend to have first your camera position and the lights set up first, and then actually go into materials. The Rhino renderer makes full use of the lights you have through Rhino. For example, spotlight or point light, or one of my most favorites, the area light. area lights, for example, work basically like diffuse light boxes. They cast the light from a surface, not from a point. They create very natural soft shadows. Specifically in photography, you don't really want sharp or hard shadows most of the time, rather soft. So those are actually the top choice to render with. And when you think about how to illuminate an object, it is basically when you think about lights and your object, about how do you model or how do you compose an object. From where do you want most of the lights coming? Do you want to draw attention to a specific area? Do you not want to draw attention to another part? So in digital rendering, there are so-called terms like a key light, which means that light is very strong, that creates the main contrast, and so-called fill lights. Those brighten up the shadow areas. And then maybe you have heard already or read about it, the so-called 3-key light. That, for example, means that you have a very simple set, like with area lights from the right, the left, and the top. And then the trick here is basically to define how strong is which light, from which direction do you want to illuminate your object the most. And let's say we're going to render the object mainly from this view. And let's maybe start with the 1-key light. To go into the light properties, go to the light. Can really make it a lot smaller. Okay, go to maximize. The multiplier in V-Ray, you basically have to imagine as the power or the strength of how much light that area light is emitting into your scene. Also, when you create a light, for those who never did it before, area lights have a very small normal emerging from the surface. That is actually the light direction. So because it's pointing down, that means that actually right now the light is going into my scene. Some of the few basic properties under options, you can actually make lights invisible or visible. If I would render it from up here, the light would actually be blocking my view. So if you want to hide lights, you can't turn those off. Let's do maybe a quick rendering. So you see that basically the whole area is slightly illuminated from the top. The lower part is rather dark. And for example, if we go to a 2-key light and start the rendering, maybe I zoom in a little bit more to the object. In this rendering, for example, you can clearly see the slightly bluish tinted light from the left hitting the upper part of the nunchuck, and the yellow light slightly coming from the right side. But for example, the front face of my the controller on the right is actually rather dim. So besides just where to you put your lights, it's also the question of the rotation and maybe how they're placed inside the scene. So I'm going ahead now and, for example, moving this light maybe a little bit to here, and then slightly rotating it. This light I rotate as well, maybe actually a little bit more, and maybe position it to there, somewhere over here. And then let's zoom in again. And there, in contrast to the former rendering, you can, for example, now clearly see that the left side of the nunchuck is nicely illuminated, the other side as well, and the right controller, the front face, gets a lot of light and draws attention to it, but the left side is rather in the shadow area, so it gets a very nice contrast. A common mistake some people make at the beginning, they just shoot in way too much light and make everything look rather two-dimensional. The trick with digital rendering, like also with photography, is how do you rotate your objects and your lights so you can basically model a nice three-dimensional look to it. You can also, of course, for example, work with the light intensity. So I click my yellowish right light and maybe set the multiplier to 0.5. So I cut its light's energy by half and do a rendering. And let's actually increase the right light a little bit. Maybe a little too much already. But there you can see that in contrast to before, you start paying more attention actually to the left part of the rendering, because that is brighter. The dark areas you pay less attention to.
So Claus, there's a question that came in. Is there a V-Ray physical camera in this scene that you're using?
Currently, right now, I only use the normal camera. However, if you go into the V-Ray options, under camera, you have spherical, fisheye, etc., and you also have the physical camera where you, like a photographer, can actually work with shutter speed, f-stop, and the ISO film. So that's V-Ray basically supports all possible types of camera you have in real life. I mean, you even have a shift lens. You can also work with depth of field. So basically, if somebody knows how to work with a digital SLR and is used to studio photography, all that he can directly put into here.
Okay, so there's a lot of power there, but right now what you're using, is it just kind of whatever is showing in your viewport is what the camera is shooting?
Yeah, right now it is just the standard, kind of like a standard perspective point hole camera.
Cool.
So I don't really work with exposing a film. I only work with how bright the lights are, and I adjust the lights, etc., to design my composition for the rendering.
Okay, so looks like you're doing a perfect thing for a beginner like me then.
And even when the rendering is done and you want to adjust, you can still then later put it into Photoshop if you save the image as TIFF or even a high definition image. Then you can tone map or adjust the colors later in Photoshop. So instead of just trying to get 100% everything right in V-Ray, there's still Photoshop to touch up the parts. And very often finished renderings people can see on the internet are actually not most times the raw rendering, they are touched up renderings. So, and to to talk a little bit more about the lights, also the surface or the size of lights is very important. For example, if I for a moment just turn my lights off, and I'm just going to create a very simple rectangular light from the side, and just make it actually really small. And I just move it a little bit to the side. Okay. And let's zoom out a little bit so you can better see how the light affects my scene, and I do the rendering. What you see is basically right now a very small light source or surface shooting out the light and creating out of those very big shadows. If I now go ahead and, for example, increase the size, let's say something like this, and now render again, you start noticing how, for example, the shadows actually get more soft. They also dim down a little bit, simply because more light is also reaching the surface behind the nunchuck and brightening up the shadows. So the trick with area lights is actually to really have them very large. And just do one more rendering, just scaling it up even more. And area lights can also have every type of size. They can be rectangular, they can be more more wider or more higher. Nicely, that doesn't. You can basically model them to the size you really need. The spotlights, for example, are also quite nice if you rather want very sharp shadows, for example, and draw attention light-wise more to a specific area and exclude the outside. The way you create those, you just click and start drawing where they should be, and then your second click, for example, defines the size of that cone, and then the third click actually now defines the position of the light source, which means from that direction the light is being shot into the scene. And then you also see an outer ring and an inside ring. That actually defines the radius from the outer edge. Outside is no light, and then the light intensity increases to the center, and the center area has the full light saturation. And then when we do small quick rendering, you see this way there's only light what's inside the cone. Outside everything is excluded. So that's actually quite nice if you want kind of like more theater or typical spotlight rendering, as the name implies. I'm going to go back to my 2-key light rig and just want to readjust. That was a little bit too strong, and this one up just a notch. The reason also why I'm giving the lights a particular color right now is no light in nature has actually no color, and most people at the beginning tend to use pure white light, which might be color neutral, but it's actually not really natural, and they can make renderings look rather grayish or cold, and through giving your lights a very subtle color, you can already give your rendering a small warmth or temperature. Another very important part then, for example, is what you do with your backdrop. Do you have, for example, a white backdrop? Do you have a medium gray backdrop? Do you have a black backdrop? Just to do it quickly, I just create a medium gray backdrop, and you can, for example, right now see through the color contrast of my backdrop being darker, my brighter game controller actually pops out more. So I draw even more attention just right onto my product. And if I make the backdrop just a notch darker, and just increase the contrast even more, maybe making it a little bit too dark. And currently the backdrop is also non-reflective. The next option would be, for example, to also make the surface maybe slightly reflective if you want to have the piece sitting on, yeah, kind of like a glass plate. And again, taking a look at photography books is a really great source to get inspirational ideas how to do the renderings, because they're basically unlike a manual for that. And I turn this one here slightly back. That one looked a little bit better.
So that's pretty straightforward then, Claus. So you're talking about lighting, but then switching over to talking about the material properties. How again did you assign the color to that backdrop?
Oh, sorry. So when you click an object, and if you don't have V-Ray, you can use then you can only use the Rhino basic material. But even when you have V-Ray installed, you can click on basic if you only quickly want to give the object just a color. And for example, you have here a name field. I can type in gray floor and then color. You can click on it and then pick the desired color. Glossy finish, that actually defines how much the surface is reflective. If I set this one to 100, the surface will be like a perfectly reflective surface. And it of course also reflects your environment. So besides building your backdrop, you also have to keep in mind that if you have reflective objects, the reflections need to have something inside. So besides building the backdrop, you can also build like the rest of the environment. For example, if it should be a studio house or an outside, or you can use a backdrop image which then is being reflected inside the ray trace reflections. And here you see the reflection of the Nunchuck. And if you set this one to 50, so it actually gets tuned down a little bit. But that's only the very basic Rhino material system you can use, which I only use when I need to just, for example, like here, have a very one color material. But if I want to have more advanced materials, then you can actually, and we can do this maybe with the Nunchuck, you can click on the plugin. Through Rhino with plugin, it gives you access then to the V-Ray engine. And right now we don't really have any material created. You could click on Browse, and then it shows you all the materials which are currently inside my scene. Those buttons here are similar to the material button you have inside the V-Ray material tab as well. This is basically now again listing the materials, getting a small preview. And you could, for example, either here or inside the editor click on Create. Then here's my new material. And let's say this one should be controller. Maybe I call this one green. If you right-click onto Scene Material, then you also can through here. The work with is the V-Ray material. Those others are actually more specialized materials. And when you then expand the properties for the controller material, you have 4 different layers: an emissive layer, a reflection layer, a diffuse layer, and a refraction layer. What that basically means, the emissive layer, if I right-click and add a layer, I could make this material emit actually light. With the reflection, that is basically like to turn it into yeah, kind of like glossy plastic or a chrome material. And diffuse, that defines the main body color. So for example, if I click on diffuse, then on the right side I have my properties. The most one which is important right now is the color. I can click on it and maybe select a nice grass green. And here note also 2 colors. Try to prevent always to work with full saturation colors, because if I start adding a lot of light, I even overexpose that color even more and make it too bright, so I overburn my image. It is rather advisable to work with dimmed down colors. For example, also if you want to render a white object, nothing in the world is perfectly white or perfectly black. So let's say you have to do a rendering for a car with wheels. Work rather with a brighter dark gray than a really black color. If you have to work with white ceramic, tune it down a little bit, because even through the rendering you might brighten it up slightly so you get more to a white. And if it's too white and you add light, then again you start washing it out. So then if you click on preview, it's nice and green. And if we do then a rendering, there we see right now kind of like a matte finish to the surface. So you don't see any highlights or any reflections on it. Some other programs, and also in the past, you were always given the option to add a diffuse layer or shader and a specular layer. Specular for the highlights. But V-Ray is a rather more advanced render engine, and highlights in real life are actually nothing else than the reflection of bright light objects inside our environment. So if I would like now to see highlights on this object, I would have to make the surface also reflective. And we can do this through going back to the material. I could, for example, now click on Edit, or go to here, and then add a layer to the reflection layer. And if I click Update Preview now, you see that there is a very small, subtle checkerboard reflection on it, which gets slightly stronger to the edges. On the right side, you have now an option for the reflection, a filter. Filter here actually means the reflection color. So if you want to tint it, that is where you can define it now. You see now that the reflection on the edge is actually slightly reddish. Highlight glossiness, that actually defines how strong the reflection is. And the reflection glossiness here, that can define now, is it a perfectly polished surface, or is the surface slightly rough, so the reflection will be more blurry. And just closing this one. I'm doing a small rendering right now. And right now it's very subtle, but on the right side you can see now a very small reflection coming in. Can, for example, add a white material. Call this one controller white. Then here, just try to pick kind of like a bright color. And sometimes you also have to, what you pick, then you have to do a test rendering and then see how does it look. Sometimes you just still have to adjust the colors. You can't really judge too much the material by just a preview function, because it also has to interact with the scene, the lighting, your whole environment, the render technique. So all that is actually subject to change. And then let's add a reflection as well. And yeah. And there now, inside the rendering, you see a little bit better on the left side, and also here a small highlight starts to come in. Now if I would like to apply the same material to other parts, I could, for example, click on the shell, go then plugin, browse, and say that should be white. And for example, this object, the button, I would like to be green. And the nice part is, if you apply one material to multiple objects and then you go and edit that material, that change, of course, then is applied to all objects which share that material. So you're not really copying the material to the different objects, you rather link those objects to that one unique material. Oh, I forgot one button. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here, because I wanted to talk a little more about the reflection as well. If I now go into edit, going to the green parts and the reflection. Whenever you add a new reflection layer, V-Ray adds it with a Fresnel effect. What that means is, as you can see, the front part is less reflective, and to the edge it looks like the reflection is getting a little bit stronger. Just imagine you're going window shopping. If you take looks perpendicular onto a glass surface, you actually can see through. Or if you look straight down into a pool. But if you look parallel to the glass or water surface, you can then actually see the reflection of the environment. And that is named by the Mr. Fresnel. To the right side of the reflection, there is an M, and that actually is, in this case, uppercase. And you see you have those M's here sometimes as well. If they're lowercase, that means they're untouched. If they're uppercase, it means there's something selected. And if you click on it, the texture editor for that property opens. And for example, here you see that the type is Fresnel, and I set it to none. And for example, right now, it's a perfect chrome finish. It totally covers the diffuse color. And in case I would do my rendering, there we see that the surface looks like a chrome or metal-like surface reflecting everything clearly. Now, I was talking before about the glossiness. For example, we set this one to 0.5. It looks actually very grainy. This means it is very, very blurry. Just a small tip. In most cases, you should be able to work with values like 0.9, 0.8. Can actually make your renderings slow down a little bit if you want to have nice and clean reflections. I set this one maybe to 0.8, and then let's do rendering so I can see what this one actually is doing to the scene. And there you see already that the surface is getting slightly more blurry on the reflection part. The reason why I'm a little bit stressing also the reflectivity for objects is what a lot of people don't realize is basically everything in real life has some sort of reflectivity. But the surface structure, is it, for example, a polished surface or is it a rough surface, defines how much do you actually see the reflection. So from your skin to car paint to wood to paper, everything has some sort of a little bit of reflection, more or less. And very often giving reflections to basically every material, but then defining how much, for example, should it be. Let's see, here I tune it down, then the reflection can get a lot lower, or I can increase it. So just that as a small tip for making materials look a little bit more realistic, specifically when you have the feeling everything looks matte and something is somewhat missing, because what you have to keep in mind is when a surface is reflective, it also shows the environment, so your object interacts with your scene design, maybe the colors or other parts are being reflected, and thus give more color information and subtle pieces of color changes on the surface which make it look more natural. However, with time, okay. The setting so far we did was actually only with 2 area lights, and you can see already that. Oh, let me actually do a rendering with the color again. You can see that just with adjusting the 2 lights and adjusting their strength, you can already get a somewhat satisfying look. Right now this of course still looks too dull. For example, the lights are still not strong enough. It looks too softly illuminated. That would require a little bit more further fine-tuning. But you don't necessarily need to utilize global illumination to get good renderings. Just very smart 2 or 3 key light settings can already do the trick for you. Of course, from the back you can see here right now that those areas are rather gray, and that's not really good. However, that's not a view I would show in my rendering anyway, so you can get away just with very simple light tricks to make a very good looking rendering, and that actually also pretty fast. However, if you would like to have a more realistic look, then global illumination will be basically your next option. The way for those who are new to digital rendering, what you have to keep in mind is the software has to simulate how light not only illuminates your scene, but also how, for example, colors are transported. For example, if you have a red object and you place it on a white piece of paper, you see a little bit of color bleeding on the white paper because the light which hits the red ball is being slightly reflected. The color of the light is changed. It hits the white paper and transports the acquired reddish tint onto the paper. That, for example, you can't really simulate with a fast 2-key or 3-key light trick. But even global illumination is actually very, very simple to set up in the basic approach. So let me position this view a little bit. And if you go to the re-ray options, one thing also for global switch, for those who might not have installed V-Ray yet, here's an option to render with hidden lights. Have this one turned off. Otherwise, there might be always some invisible light inside the renderings which you do not see inside Rhino. And then we can go to Indirect Illumination. And what Indirect Illumination basically means, or GI means Global Illumination, my area lights, they actually provide the so-called direct light. But the moment a light ray hits a surface, the light ray stops. Indirect illumination provides then additional bounces. So when a light hits a surface, it loses a little bit of energy, bounces off. It hits another surface, loses a little bit more of energy, bounces off. That is what indirect illumination is doing, and it's called indirect illumination simply because the light is more scattered. For example, my area light is providing the direct light and light contrast and shadow, but indirect light doesn't really do that. It just fills light. So think about maybe GI or indirect illumination as to fill the shader areas of your rendering, and also to take care of physical effects like light bending or caustic graphics or color bleeding. You can simply turn it on by clicking on, and by standard you have a primary engine and secondary engine. I will try not to talk too much about the technology behind it because I would blow this out of our time. Just rather give some simple steps which might be good to use. Instead of Monte Carlo, I actually would use light cache. Light cache is a very, very fast rendering technique. The same with irradiance map. Those are actually two of my most preferred methods, specifically also for animation. And then below here you have then irradiance map and light cache mentioned again. Be careful with your scroll wheel. And those are the options for how to fine-tune how those GI methods work. But as I said, to make this a little bit more manageable time-wise, -3 and 0. It sounds very abstract. Actually it is. But maybe try to imagine it as the quality, how fine details are. So from 0 to -3, think about that as kind of like a threshold. That setting is somewhat okay. Actually, pretty good might be -3 and 1. But if you want to do quick renderings, you don't want to start all the time doing all your test renderings with the full quality because it takes more time. So what you can do here is actually say maybe -4 and -2 or -3. So basically I set my threshold already in the lower area and tell the irradiance map to ignore a lot of fine details and be rather coarse. And for light cache, here it's called subdivision. It's basically the same. Think about it as the DPI of print. The higher the DPIs, the more cleaner the print. If you print with 72 DPI, you will probably get pretty blocky results. And subdivision here is basically the same. So maybe we cut this one down something to 500. And all these values I'm putting there right now are more rather arbitrary. There's no specific, like it has to be this way. And the more you start working with it, you also will like figure out what do you like and what resolution do you need to be able to judge a specific outcome. Now with this set up and hitting the render button, you will see that some other stuff is happening first, and then actually it gets coarse, and then the image starts getting clean. So what happened was that V-Ray calculated the additional bounces of the light, how to brighten up the scene, where to brighten up the scene, where are the fine details, and then mixed that together with the direct light.
Well, Claas, I didn't know that it would be possible, but you've been able to explain how V-Ray works in a way that even I understand it. So that's great work, Claas. Do you have anything else?
Any questions so far?
There have been questions coming in that we've been answering. Unless there's something else that you have to finish up, if you could maybe pass it back to me, and I'll share the special offer that we have, and then we can turn it back to you to any questions.
Sure. Yeah, and honestly, when it comes to digital rendering, that is basically now most of the stuff inside a nutshell. Of course, this is a really quick idea about digital rendering and also GI. There's way more to it, but that's basically the steps you can take. Put your lights in first, try to fine-tune it, and then you turn on the GI Also for, let me go back to the V-Ray options.
That's great. I'm the presenter now, Juan, or Claas. So
okay.
let me just step in and we can turn it back to you. But yeah, I just want to say thanks again for everyone that has come to watch this, and we just want to extend a special offer. If you don't yet own V-Ray for Rhino, you can get that on our website. Just go to tsplines.com/V-Ray. And then if you want to use the coupon code WAN in honor of our in-house V-Ray user, that will get you $25 off when you get V-Ray for Rhino at our website until the end of the month. Yeah, again, just a big thanks to Claus for kind of breaking down how to use V-Ray. So yeah, just setting up the lights, assigning the materials, and then basically from there, it just however looks like you can fine-tune or tweak to get really just what you want. But those basic steps are pretty straightforward. So thanks for everyone that's been here today. I hope that everyone that has been working along has been able to get these same results. If you do have any questions, we have a couple minutes. So if you just want to type in any additional questions that you have, and we can turn it back over to Claas to get those answers. But when you do leave the webinar, there'll be a survey that will pop up, and if you could just answer those questions, that will help us improve the future webinars that we do, and we'll really value your response there. So I'll just turn it back to Claas, and if there's any final questions, then you can go ahead and ask them now. Well, just one other note that I'll make is that Claas has shared kind of a list of resources that he uses when he does his rendering. So we'll be including that in the follow-up email that you'll get in a few days with the recording of this webinar.
Actually, if you want to say, those who are watching right now, I'm creating a light material. For those who maybe never worked with lights before, through geometry and applying a light color to a material, because then you can build actually light bodies. For example, here I have now kind of like very simple arcs on top, and those arcs, I give that light color. This of course only works with GI because it's not really a light, just the material is emitting light energy and the GI system is calculating that. But the nice part about those is they're very, very soft, and through the light shape you can actually already define also the reflection of your, or the shape of your highlights. Because with a point light, it's a point, or with a rectangle, with an area light, it's just a straight rectangle. But with those, you have a little bit more creative influence on how those lights should look like. And just see the rendering. There you can see that I tinted it pink, so you can see that the light is really coming from the material. And at the same time, on top of the nunchuck, you see those stripes of those lights.
Wow, that's pretty neat.
Now, and the really nice part about it is V-Ray gives you all the tools you have in a real studio photography. It just cuts out the problem with physics. You can place things that don't fall down, and you can bend reality and have full creative control over it. I mean, unfortunately, you can't do it with with mesh lights, but even with lights, so regular lights. Where's it? Oh. Wrong key. Because they also affect the reflection or the specularity or the diffuse. If you position, for example, point lights somewhere and only turn on specularity, that means they would only create a highlight over the object, but they don't add additional light. But the big problem with photography is you can only work with your real lights, and in each light always emits light into the scene. But with additional lights, as specular lights, you can create additional highlights where maybe for presentation or graphical purpose you would like to have those.
Cool. Well, good. Well, Claus, thank you again so much for taking the time to share this with us. Do you have any final?
Any questions there?
Yeah, it looks like all the questions have been answered. So, yeah, just thanks again, Claus, for taking your time over this this two-part webinar series to show how to use T-Splines to speed up the modeling process and then V-Ray to get a really nice render out of that. So, just yeah, again, really appreciate your taking the time to do this.